The max effort exercises are all variations of the main 3 power lifts: squat, bench, and deadlift. Bringing up your weak points is actually more important than utilizing your strengths, because your strengths will come back fast. If the strength really falls off, it's something that's normally not a problem, prioritize it for 3 weeks, it will come right back. The more you're in the sport, the bigger the gap between your competitive max and your training max will become. It's time to sit down, keep it real, and cut the bullshit. Welcome to Table Talk. What I'm going to do first is I'm going to go through the questions that were submitted to the, the community, to the YouTube community group thing, whatever it's called. And then the questions that I saw that were in the comments. And by the way, I rarely ever read the comments, but I did read these and replied to some of the people there, because I really don't want confusion on something that's titled simple and effective. And then I'm going to get into some of the questions that kind of extend past making this simple and I don't want to do a really, really deep dive into Conjugate. We can do that with a different podcast at a later time. I just want to get all the simple stuff kind of out of the weeds so people can understand it. So when I'm speaking about it or answering questions about it, we're kind of coming from the same place, and people will be able to better understand when I do speak about changes in percentages and things of that sort. They'll know where the base of reference is, or at least I will have a resource to be able to refer them to for that base of reference. There are articles that were linked to the last Conjugate podcast. The 8 keys is one of them. You can Google search elitefts.com, Conjugate method, dynamic effort method, max effort method, supplemental exercises, any specific term associated with this, and you will find very long form articles as far as short articles on each one of these topics. So I've been writing about these topics it's actually how I got online, was answering questions on a forum before social media days and everything else back in the 90s, mid-late 90s, answering questions about how we trained at Westside. So with that in mind, before I get into this, I got to kind of do what I always do and give props where props are due. If it wasn't for Louis Simmons, I wouldn't know anything that I do know about Conjugate, or better stated, what I would know about Conjugate would be a fraction of what I actually do know, because I would not have trained under him for 14 years and, picked his brain for that period of time, read the same sources that he's read and applied it. I tried to apply it to the general population. I've tried to apply it to beginner lifters, intermediate lifters, advanced lifters, and so forth. But all of it kind of stems back to Louis. So the credit that I like to give out in regards to this, because I know Louis, is, anything that is good and sounds really good, then that's came from Louis. Anything that sounds fucked up or sounds, bad, or that he wouldn't agree with, that didn't come from Louis. That came from somebody else. But all the credit always goes, back to where it is. I never forget where I come from. That goes all the way back to my early days at Finley Barbell Club, and Bob Wall and George Crawford and people after that taught me how to do the lifts with great technique and so forth. So it's something especially with Conjugate, something I feel I have to put out there, because, we're getting further and further away from when this whole thing really did start to, come to the surface. And I think people are forgetting, where it actually comes from. And Louis will be the first to tell you that he didn't invent it. He just learned how to use it. Where I'm going to kind of circle him behind that and said he learned how to use something that everybody, not everybody, because the information wasn't very easy to have access to, but the smartest people in the industry at the time had access to all the same information. They weren't able to put together. He was. So that's kind of where we'll go from there. So my jump off point is going to be with the speed pulls. That speed pulls typically in a general template are going to fall after the dynamic effort squats. And I mean, speed and dynamic effort are basically terms that are used interchangeable. Some people will call it speed squats. Some people call them dynamic squats. You know, some people will DY squats, other people DX squats. It's kind of all the same things, just different terminology or different ways to express the exact same thing. So the speed pulls, when performed optimally, in my opinion, the bar is going to be loaded with whatever percent you're going to be training at, albeit 40, 50, or 60%. And that will be loaded before you start your squats. So you'll do your dynamic squat work. After that's over, because you're going on shorter rest periods when you're doing dynamic work. So optimally, you know, under 90 seconds. If you're big, super heavyweight, you can go, 2 minutes, but that's still kind of stretching it. So 60 to 90 seconds would be optimal. And then after the squats, a little bit more time, maybe 5 minutes, and then straight into the speed pulls. So the weight shouldn't be, 80%, for your speed pulls, because you're not going to be moving it very fast. So typical recommendation is going to be around 50% of, I like to use your best perceived max. All right. So for me, the difference between maxes are you have a competitive max, which is the best that you've done in competition. You have a training max, which is the best that you've done in training. Then a perceived max, which is what you think you can do and what your training partners would agree that you could do. I think you need other people's eyes on that to be able to really zero that down. And out of the three, I think the third is the best to go off of for dynamic work is the perceived max. That's because a competitive max, the more you're in the sport, the bigger the gap between your competitive max and your training max will become. And that's because you're going to find better ways to taper, better ways to peak, better recovery for the last 14 days, before the meet. And with that comes the ability to display your strength in a far better manner than when you're training week after week after week and basically in a constant state of breakdown, muscular breakdown, physical breakdown, mental breakdown. Everything's breaking down as you're getting ready for a meet. That's part of training. That's part of getting ready for a meet. Then you have this recovery, this peak time, not peak time, but recovery time, tapering time, to allow all that stuff to actually fully recover and then be able to express your maximum to its full potential. That full potential for me was a lot. It was 10 to 15%, so I never would be able to hit those numbers in the gym that I would hit in a meet. So it would be very stupid to base my training on my meet max unless I was to reduce the training percentage to compensate for that. So say everybody else would be using 55%, but I had, 10% more carryover for a meet. Well, then I automatically would be at 45%. So getting back to the perceived max is a little bit easier to kind of go off of because it can change a little bit through the training cycle. So if you're doing your max effort work and you have different max effort exercises and you find that your pin 1 deadlift is usually always about the same as what you can pull in a meet, well then your perceived max should be pretty easy based upon after you do pin 1, so you kind of know where you fall at that time. But the good thing with dynamic work, or the speed work per se, is you have some room for error. So, and when you're dealing with weights that are in 40, 50, 60% range, the difference between 5% here nor there is not going to be that great of a difference. Now, when you're in the 90% range, if it's for triples, the difference of 5%, it's a difference between doing a set of 3 and doing a set of 1. So it's a huge difference. In the original podcast, I talked about how to determine your optimal percentage for speed work. So just to rehash that very quickly, you would take one training session and start with 45%. I don't care what it's 45% of. Training doesn't matter. I don't care. Make it 40% if it's competitive. So I don't care what your max is, just start at the 40%. And then if it's the bench, do a set of 3, do the next set at 45%, next set at 50%, next set at 55, next set at 60, 65, 70, and so on. And what you're looking for is when you hit a set where it's like, wow, that felt right. That felt like I was producing force. Because if the weight's too light, it's going to feel like you can actually throw it all the way through the ceiling. You don't have to stay that tight. It's too light. You're going to know that. Then when it starts to get to a point where you have to maintain your technique, you have to stay tight. You don't have to be max effort tight, but you have to be tight enough to be able to maintain technique. Then you're going to start to, when you have that tightness, you're going to be able to display more force. So you're going to start to feel that little pop, coming through. Wherever that happens, say in this case it happens at 50%, then you just keep working up those 5% jumps at a 60-second, 90-second rest period until the bar begins to slow down. And now you don't feel that pop. It starts to feel more like a grind, and yes, fatigue is going to set in, but it's a non-factor with this. So let's say you end up with, you start to feel this around 50% and it begins to go away. It's 70%. Well, then your speed phase is going to be 50, 55, 60, maybe even 65. Or you could wave it, and go 55, 60, 65. But you're not going to go 70, you're not going to go 45 because those are kind of out of range. So you can stay within that optimal for you range of dynamic work. Now, being that there were 4 different percentages that you had, 50, 55, 60, and 65. All right, so you had 4 different percent ranges. You can wave, because somebody asked about different dynamic effort waves, like how you can put them together. First way, the easiest way, is to always use 50, 55, and 60, then go back to 50 again, and just keep rotating through. It's that simple. This is for the squat. Or you can go 50, 55, 60, and then the next weight go 55, 60, 65, and then take it back down. So then you have, a little bit more variance, to play into it. I think either way is going to be just as effective. It's just something that you can play with a little bit to be able to see. As you get stronger, the percentages don't necessarily have to go up. If you're doing only 3-week waves of 50, 55, and 60%, and that yields you a easy 300-pound bench. I mean, easy as in, it's easy. Everybody there knows it's easy. You left 20 pounds on the platform, so it should have been 320. Logic dictates if you just repeat that same 3-week cycle with the same weights that you used for the 300, so you don't change the weights. But then the next time you go get that 320, that next training cycle that you go through is going to be easier for you to recover from, which is recovery is key. So it's going to be easier for you to recover from because the weights are not necessarily higher. This is dynamic work we're working on. We're trying to work on force production and doing so with the best technique you can possibly do. So if you're leaving weights on the platform, you know, and I know everybody's going to want to say they do the 300, but they could have done 320. So they want to make that 3-week wave and base it all off 320. That's what everybody wants to do. But that's where so many people get into trouble, because then they start overreaching and they start thinking, well, I should do 330. But the fact is, with the weights that you used, you know, be it like 150 to, it's probably 150, 165 or something like that. So you probably did a wave of 150, 165, 170 over 3 weeks. And just by repeating that same thing for that next meet, and you know you left 30 pounds on the platform, repeat the same thing, go get that 30 pounds. You know, it's just, and if you think about it, logically it makes more sense than to say, okay, fuck it, I should have got that 330, let's take this up now, let's go 170, you know, 200, 220, and then I'm going to hit that 330, which will probably, then we'll leave 30 pounds again, and that's going to be 365. Shit doesn't work like that. You know, it'd be nice if it did, you know, but like they say, slow and steady wins the race. I believe that to a certain degree, but within, you know, also within a certain degree of intelligence. There also has to be some insanity behind some of the process too. Not on speed work, because it's about force production, and it's also about optimizing technique. So your speed work should be technically sound. You know, this is the time when you have, if it's a squat and you're doing 8 sets of 2, you're going to have 8 opportunities, 8 first reps, which in my opinion, when it comes to powerlifting, the reps that matter the most are the first reps. So it can be a set of 5, it can be a set of 3, it can be a set of 2. The first rep is the one that matters, because when you're on the platform, you only do one. So if your first rep, you know, looks like shit, and then the second one looks better, and the third looks good, and the fourth looks great, and the fifth looks awesome, who gives a shit? You know, the first one has to look amazing, and then you want to repeat that. So when you're doing 8 sets of 2, technique's pretty easy to manage, you know, with 2 reps, unless you're really, really getting heavy. But even then, when you're getting really, really heavy, even the 90% range, doubles are it's very doable to be able to maintain technique for doubles. So out of a scenario of 8 sets of 2, you're going to have 16 total reps being done with solid technique that's reinforcing the technique that you want to build upon to be able to get stronger. So 16, 32. So in a 3-week wave, you're looking at close to 50 reps performed with optimal technique. Okay, so the argument that I get against that is, well, when you do that, that's optimal technique, but it's not optimal technique with heavy weights. Okay, but you're also using the 60-second rest period. So fatigue is a factor. So what is it? Is it the heavy weights, or is it the fatigue, you know, that you're dealing with? And this can be debated. You know, I could debate both sides of it if I really wanted to. But those last few sets, if you're using compensatory acceleration and you're really using the dynamic effort method, you're going to have to focus hard on making sure the technique is solid on the last sets, because the fatigue is going to be setting in, because every rep you're trying to do, you're trying to apply as much force as you possibly can. So that answers the question about the dynamic effort deadlifts, like where do they fit in? I think that's the best place, is right after the squats. I've known other people to throw them on other days, and that's fine. You know, if you throw it on other days, then I would prefer to see it first. If you're putting it on max effort lower body day, I'd prefer to see that first, then the max effort work. Speed work typically should always fall before heavy strenuous strength work. But that's not to say it can't be done otherwise. You know, experimenting is the best way to get strong, especially if you're in a sticking point. It also answers the waving of the squat cycle, the 3-week cycle. You know, it can repeat. You know, for years that I was at Westside, it was the same cycle over and over and over and over and over and over and over. You know, it kept repeating. As long as the numbers kept going up, we kept with the same weight. The numbers started going up a little slower, then we had to make a change. You know, and sometimes that was taking the percent down. Actually, most of the time it was taking the percent down. Sometimes it meant taking it up. Now, bands and chains, you know, that's a different conversation, but I will put it in here that, you know, the bands and chains can be added for the speed deadlifts and for the speed pulls. For the speed pulls, I would just throw the bands over top, you know, maybe reduce the percentage by 10, because there's going to be some tension on the bar at the beginning. It depends on how you set your bands up. So typically if you're using bands, what you want to do is whatever weight or tension there is at the bottom of the lift, you want to take off of the bar. So if it's a squat, for example, and you're using a box squat, the tension that's still on the bands at the bottom of the box, say it's, you know, 50 pounds, within 50 pounds needs to come off the bar, because that's still on the body the whole time. If it's chains, then the chains are being deloaded, you know, so they're not there at the bottom. So then that doesn't have to change. So the only adjustment you may have to make might be a slight adjustment of maybe 5% down on the speed work, but typically I just throw it right on top and see what happens, because you're going to be using more force coming out of the bottom. So that percent difference shouldn't negatively impair you in any way, because you're actually going to be standing up with more force than you otherwise would without. That's with the chains. Same thing with the bench. The bench press, as far as the dynamic cycles, it can stay a flat wave. Just figure a weight that's good for you, and 50%. You can use the same thing that I just talked about. You know, start at 45%, work up, find your optimal range. You can either do a 3-week wave within your optimal range, or you can just find the weight that feels really, really good and just stay with that for all your sets. Or you can split it in half and do half your sets at 4 sets at one weight, 4 sets at another weight. You know, there's a lot of variance. There's a lot of, you know, play that you can do with dynamic work, because like I said earlier, there's a bigger degree of variance, or a bigger degree of error, if you want to present it that way, when you're using lighter percentages than you are heavier percentages. So what you don't want to do is to, you know, have your whole training cycle based around, you know, speed work that's really not speed work, because it's all too heavy. You know, you can have a session like that, or a couple sessions like that, which could technically be called Circumax, because you're going to be taking the percentages up really, really high. But you can't train like that for long periods of time. It's just, you can't recover from it, and just usually going to nosedive. Circumax is a conversation to take to a third podcast, more advanced things that are kind of built into the Conjugate system, because I don't think anybody should consider, you know, any type of Circumax type of dynamic work unless their technique and their form is really fucking solid, like 90% plus every single repetition, and not solid as in solid for their fucked up way of doing it. I'm talking solid for the most optimal way that they can do a lift. And that changes based upon the person, and it changes based upon what that person's goals are. So I'll just throw out a very easy to understand example. The wider you squat, the shorter the distance the bar has to travel. So if you're a power lifter, it can be more advantageous for you to squat wider than closer. Again, there's obviously other things that come into play here, or everybody would squat wide and they don't. So there's other things that come into play as far as leverages. But for the most part, I can take anybody who's an intermediate or beginner, move them out wider and shorten their bar path in half. Take it from 13, 14 inches to 6, 7, or 8. All right. Now if their aspirations are to become, the best power lifter that they can become, and that wide position isn't biomechanically the best suited for their structure, that's their structure at their given body weight. So that can change. If somebody is 165 pounds and then they end up being 365 pounds, no, the bone in the hip girdle doesn't change, but all the supportive tissue around it does, which changes things. Okay. So the point being is, if their goal is to squat the biggest they can possibly squat, and I get them in a young enough time period from a training age standpoint, then I'm going to try to get them, I'm going to teach them wide, because wide will strengthen close. Close doesn't necessarily strengthen wide, and all these other type of things. And then the argument that comes back is, well, not everybody's hips are designed to be able to squat wide. I don't give a fuck. What I care about is the fact that the person said that they want to be able to squat competitively at the highest level, in powerlifting. So from a biomechanics standpoint, is, the breaststroke the best thing for a swimmer? Is the way that a baseball pitcher throws the ball, is that biomechanically the best thing for the shoulder joint? No, you want the person to throw the ball, which is going to give them the greatest performance that they're able to produce. So then this falls back on, you're not looking at the longevity of the lifter. Maybe not, but 90% plus of all lifters I know don't last 5 years. So what longevity are you talking about? Are you talking about the longevity of the average person that's going to be in the sport? Or are you talking about the longevity of the very rare individual that's going to be in the sport for 25, 30 years? Because over 25, 30 plus years, yeah, they'll probably have wear and tear on their hips, but I can probably guarantee if they squatted close, they'd have wear and tear of their knees as well. So I'm not saying from this standpoint, it's just kind of going off on a little tangent. I'm not saying on this standpoint that everybody should squat wide. What I'm saying is everybody should squat in a way that allows them to display their strength to its greatest potential, regardless of what any lab coat says, because they're not under the bar at the meet having to stand up with the fucking weight. You are. And this works vice versa. So if you get the school of thought that everybody should squat wide, but you're just strong as fuck every time you're squatting close, then you're squatting in close. There's no change. Even if they tell you that's, biomechanically you're not built to squat like that, you should squat, medium or wide, but you squat more. You do whatever you're going to be the most optimal at, and then you optimize the shit out of that over a period of time to a point of almost perfection, because there is no such thing as perfection. And that may mean, a beginner has to change from their current stance to a wider stance, or their wider stance to a closer stance. Body weight changes a lot of things. Leverage changes a lot of things. So that kind of addresses the standpoint of the stances and so forth. When you're dealing with max effort work and variations of max effort work, just changing your stance. You don't even, let's forget about bars. Let's forget about bands. Let's forget about change. Let's forget about all that shit. All right. I already said in the first video that your max effort variations are going to be based upon some type of good morning low box squat or pull, right? So if we just stay with those and say, okay, you can't do the actual competition lifts, but you can do anything but that. So you squat with a medium to wide stance, you bench with pinky on the rings, and you deadlift conventional. All right. Well, just changing your stances on all those different exercises for max effort work adds probably 100 different variations. Changing your stances or you can change your stance on the bench too. Because you can tuck under, put your feet out in front, put your feet on the bench. So there's ways to change that as well. The max effort variations, as I said, should change each week. How frequently you come back to that max effort variation is going to depend upon where you fall as far as your powerlifting training age. So if you're a beginner, you're going to use probably 8 to 6 exercises and just keep repeating back to them, or variations that are just a little off that. So it might be a different grip on your deadlift. It might be a different stance on the squat. It might be, a different stance on the good morning. As I said before, the good morning would be more not necessarily max effort, but sub-max, which will be 3 to 5s. So, you got closed stance, wide stance, medium stance, arch back, rounded back, flat back or neutral back. So there's different variations of each thing. So the max effort exercises, even when you're dealing with the specialty bars, the max effort exercises are all variations of the main 3 power lifts: squat, bench, and deadlift. So cambered squat bar is a variation. It's just changing the center of gravity of where the weight is. Same with the SS yoke bar. Then the other variations are going to be the ranges of motion. So you have the partial work with board presses, pulling off blocks for the deadlift, high boxes, different or super low boxes for the squat. So you can increase the range of motion, decrease the range of motion, which is changing the time under tension, and keeping in mind that the main goal of the max effort work is to strain. So with that in mind, you do want to always try to break records and so forth, but don't get so caught up in that, because you can still have a very good training day and not break a PR on a max effort movement, and actually have that be a more effective training day than a training day to where you crush a PR and then leave the gym. So now I've got to go to my list of the things I didn't know off of the top of my mind. Do you guys have a live stream running to where they can ask the questions that I'm doing this?
Yes, we do. Do you need any?
No, I'm good right now.
Okay.
But if you guys have the questions, pop them in there and I will get to them. Can you run the program twice a week? Yes. Chad Ikes used to do that. I'd rather see it 3 days over a week. So like Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and then that next Monday becomes day 4 instead of twice. Because you do want to increase your work capacity. But if all you can do is 2 days, you do the 2 days. The fact is you do what makes it work. So the thing to keep in mind with the 2 days is if you're trying to train for meet and you can only train 2 days instead of the 4, well, then your 12-week training cycle, if you want to call it that, it just became 24. All right. So those are some of the things that you need to understand with that. I wouldn't stack it, so I wouldn't do both dynamic squat days on one day, both max effort days on another day. I wouldn't do that. For a few reasons. Recovery, once again, is going to fall in there as far as one thing. Mental focus when it comes to sticking points, they're either mental, physical, or technical. And the mental focus of what you have going into the gym needs to be on point. So you don't want to have too much shit that you have to get done in training that has to be on your mind as far as main focus when you go into the gym. So if you're going into the gym for max effort day, your main focus is that max effort exercise and then hitting your weak points. Okay, that's kind of easy to put that in a box, keep that focus there, and have that focus for a couple of days or whatever is needed leading into the meet now, or leading into the training day. Now, if all of a sudden you have that main focus is going to be, I got to do speed squats, I got to do speed pulls, I got to do speed benches, then I got my accessories. It's I don't want to say it's overtraining your focus capabilities, but that's kind of like the focus that you would have going into a meet, and anybody that's competed before, meets are fucking draining. And it's not because of the 9 attempts that you hopefully make, or the 6 attempts that you actually do. It's because the focus is so hard, peaking for that meet, that when it's over, you're just fucking drained. So you can train yourself to be able to manage it's stress, to be able to manage that stress and that focus over a period of time. But I don't think that's the best way to go about doing it. That question was asked actually quite a few times. So I'm more of a fan of the 3 days than the 2. If you're transitioning from a linear program to a conjugate, what do you really need to do to start? That's probably the easiest transition there is. You just do it. Take the linears wherever you're at. If you're sick of it, I like to take, I'm big into taking, I don't want to call them deloads, so to say, but, if it's take a week off. It depends, where you are in the training cycle. I mean, if you're still doing 8s, stuff like that, you probably don't. But if you've been doing heavy 5s, heavy 3s, take a week off, give yourself a mental break, kind of separate yourself from that, divorce it, break up with it, whatever you want to call it. And then start to focus on, okay, this is how I'm going to train moving forward. And I'm going to commit to it for X amount of time. So I would give it 6 months, to commit and see, how it's going to work for you. It's going to be hard sometimes, depending upon the workload that you're used to doing compared to the workload that you're going to start doing, but you will adapt. So usually it's the first 3 or 4 weeks, maybe a little bit deeper. It can 6. I mean, once you get past 6 weeks, it's pretty much good. But within the first 4 weeks or so, there's going to be a lot of questioning, like, what the fuck is it? I don't know if this is going to work. Maybe I should, tailspin back to what I was doing. That's not giving it enough time, nor is it giving it enough time if you're moving from linear to block or from any other program to another program. So all programs have to be given a certain period of time to allow your body to adapt to it, because just the change to the program alone is a big change in your adaptive capacity, mentally, and physically, for that period of time. So you got to allow that to actually adapt before you figure out, is this really going to help or is it really not going to help? Because you may have to take 2 steps backwards to get 3 steps forward. How do you know how much accessory work you need to do? It depends on how hard you're training your accessories. So remember, the accessories fall after the supplemental exercises. So with the supplemental exercises, to step back real quick, I was asked the question of, I noted on the template that the supplemental exercises should be your weak points. That's just true. What I didn't note is every now and again, it's going to be your strong point. Okay. So I'm a big fan of, if you have a strength, you want to utilize and maximize that strength, but you have to bring up your weak points. Bringing up your weak points is actually more important than utilizing your strengths, because your strengths will come back fast. Okay. The weak points come up slow. So I would say that supplemental exercise can be something that really hammers your strong point once a month, maybe once every 6 weeks. And keep in mind the supplemental exercises are the ones that you're going to hit really hard for 3 to 5s in that intensity zone, in that intensity range, typically around an 80%, intensity range, 2 to 3 sets. It's going to be hit hard, but it's going to be hit heavy. And then you'll back out. Now, if you're starting to come into a meet and you become worrisome, or you don't think things are starting to align the way that they should, and it's not just basic meet fatigue training, then you can make the strength, every other supplemental exercise to try to pull that up, to be where it needs to be. Or the other option with it is, if the strength really falls off, it's something that's normally not a problem, and it really falls off, prioritize it for 3 weeks. It will come right back to where it was before, maybe even a little bit better, and then you can back off of it again for quite a while. So the 4 weeks and so forth. So that's where that falls in there. Now, the accessories that fall after that depend upon, there's a lot of questions in here that ask about volume. Now, volume to me, the way that I was taught, and several times, but it's been used interchangeably so often that I no longer debate about it. The way I was taught, volume is sets times reps. So, 5 sets of 5 is a volume of 25. Workload is sets times reps times weight. Okay. A lot of people are calling workload volume. All right. So as long as we're on the same page, I'm fine with that. I just need to, if I'm speaking to somebody, I need to know how they define it, which, if you've watched my podcasts in the past, I will ask that if I'm discussing training with somebody. But I'm putting this out there so you know how I define it. So the total volume of the accessories isn't necessarily that important. The intensity of what you're doing, with that intensity not being expressed, is a form of bar weight as it's typically defined. But the effort, let's put it that way, the effort needs to be either very high, some type of, I like to use like HIIT training principles, because you're dealing with things now like side raises, tricep extensions, push downs, stuff like that. Things that might be 1 or 2 sets go into complete failure, and maybe, beyond rest pause and stuff like that, and done. Okay. So it needs to be such as that, or very high volume, but staying 4 or 5 reps away from failure. So 8 sets of 8 on dumbbell tricep extensions is something that I like a lot of. It's something we do at Westside. I actually like to take that up even and go 12, 15 sets of 8, with shortened rest periods. But a lot of those sets are going to be away from failure. So it's not going to be in there. Side raises, front raises, shoulder work, stuff like that isn't going to be taken to failure if there's going to be more than 3 or 4 sets. If it's going to be under that, where it's just going to be 1 or 2 sets, there's going to be a warm-up set, then it's going to get blasted and then be done. And the reason for that is when you're falling more towards the bottom of the training session, what you're really working on is, the stabilizer muscles, and you're working on muscle hypertrophy. So you're building muscle mass. So where you're going to get the biggest bang for the buck kind of depends upon the person. Some people inherently know what works better for them than others. For me, the failure worked better, but I couldn't do, 5 sets of failure on tricep movements towards the end of my training session, because it's stupid to do an accessory movement that you can't recover from for your next main training session. That's not the purpose of the accessory movements. Certain things are going to have to be pushed more than others, so accessory movements for abdominals, lower back, stuff like that, it's probably going to be more volume based than it's going to be more effort based, and that's just based upon experience. I don't know how else to put that out there. I've been around the sport over 3 decades, so that's always volume based. I mean, you can do, reverse hypers for strip sets or whatever the fuck you want to do, and it's not even going to ever come close to trying to build up your total volume, on that. And, Louis has found correlations with workload, which I haven't, with the people I work with, I haven't found the same correlations, but I'm also not training the same skill lifter, and it's not being utilized in the same way. So the more you can keep your training program for said individual or yourself under constraints that allow for you to progress, the more variables and metrics you're going to be able to track to know if you're moving forward or backward. Not telling you to do the same training session 52 times in a row, for a year, but certain template should be followed that kind of allows you to be able to see that when 50% of your work is done in a 50 to 60% intensity zone, and 20% is done in, a 60 to 70% intensity zone, and 10% is done in the 80% intensity zone, and 5% and so forth. When you can start to figure those things out, which takes time, right? This is where experience comes in. As it's always been said, training is a science, and it's an art, but you have to be able to have metrics that you can kind of put in place to be able to see, what's going on. So when progress halts, which it will, if you're in this for a long enough period of time, it will. And this is why a lot of lifters don't last long, because a natural progression is typically, typically what I see is somebody's new to the sport, they come into the sport and they're making the newbie gains no matter what they do. All right, and they're getting strong and they're doing well, and this may, depending upon genetics, it may take them a year, it may take them 2 years, 3 years, whatever it's going to be. Then boom, things start to slow down, things start to get hard. Then they'll go on drugs, and boom. Instead of trying to figure out how to overcome that sticking point, they just go on the PEDs and they overcome it with that. And then it takes them to another level, which can be that going from a class 1 to a pro, or going from an elite to all-time world records. And then 2-3 years of that, boom, stuck. And they still haven't learned how to overcome a fucking sticking point. They have no idea what to do. So they go a year and they think, fuck, I must be done, and then retire. Or they keep pounding their head against the same wall, trying to get the same results out of doing the same thing over and over again, and then they get hurt. Because they don't have the drugs to rely on anymore. I guess they can go in gear. Gear would take them to another level. So that was kind of the progression before. It would be raw, then gear, then drugs. But regardless of the fact, they're going to get to a point to where it may take 2 years, it may take 3 years just to get a 5-pound PR total. And then something happens, and then the meet after that, they have a 100-pound PR in their total, or a 50-pound PR in their total at the highest levels. And then they attribute it to whatever new drug it was, or whatever new exercise they were doing over the past 3 or 4 months. And it's not attributed to any of that. It's attributed to the 3 years of trying all the other shit that didn't work to be able to find the thing that did work. So I'm a big proponent of learn that process as soon as you possibly can, because you're not as strong. There's less wear and tear. There's less beat down on the body. So if you learn that in the intermediate phases of training, and then when you get to the higher levels of training to where you're actually pushing your upper limits, and actually starting to become what you want to become, then when you start to run into that wall, you understand, what's going on. So now instead of freaking out, stressing out, quitting, and all the other things that come along with it that all produce more cortisol, which in hindsight, it just makes it even harder to recover, because all you're doing is freaking out about the fact that you can't make any progress, which is just this vicious circle, which just ends up with people leaving the sport. So when they learn how to overcome that, then they run into that. It's like, okay, I've been here before a couple times. Maybe let's back this down, try this, let's pivot here. Let's see what happens. Let's try this, which I totally disagree with. And, don't think is always said was never going to work, but fuck it. Let's try it now. 'Cause what do I got to lose? And then see what happens, and then kind of pop from there. So I don't know how I got to that from accessory work, but I fucking did. Dynamic day. What exercise do you use for dynamic day? This was a question that, bam, I should have. This was a big miss. For intermediates to beginners that are powerlifters, I like those movements to be the bench press for the bench day, the box squat for squatting, and a regular deadlift or pulling with the weight on mats, for the deadlift. So kind of keeping it really close to home. I'm a big proponent of the box squat. I don't want to go into all the benefits of that. I got other videos for that, so I'm not going to waste my time with that on this, but big proponent of that because it lessens the wear and tear and it's easy to recover from. Just don't drop on the box. Don't fall on the box. Don't crash the box. Sit tight, pause, stand up. Perfect form. Work the shit out of the form. Make sure, you're reinforcing the technique with that. Now, once you become more advanced or higher intermediate, then those are going to be more staples before the meet, coming into the meet. But you can use specialty bars, and this is where things kind of drive me nuts. It's because beginners think they need to use all these specialty bars, where it's fun, right? I get that, and I'll get into that here in a second. So it's fun and it can have its place, but it's not necessary. Where I think it becomes necessary is when you're high, intermediate, or advanced and a powerlifter, and then you can start using the specialty bars to waive your workload. So if we go back to the original training cycle example I used, which was 50, 55, and 60%, my max using a front squat harness is low. So let's say the max for somebody, and I did this in the Russin programming video that we did. Let's say the max is like 300 pounds with a front squat harness. And then my max with a cambered squat bar is 400. And my max with a yoke bar is 500. All right. Now, the cool thing about this is I will know these because they're max effort exercises that I'm using. So I won't be working off perceived. It's going to be off kind of real data, which is, it's a training max. So it makes the percentages, when I talked about that room for error, it reduces that room for error tremendously. And if I waive three week cycles with 50, 55, and 60%, with the first 3 being the front squat harness, the second 3 being the cambered squat bar, the third being the yoke bar, the overall volume is going to stay the same. the intensity expressed as percentage of the max lifted, which is 50, 55, 60%, stays the same. The workload, however, changes because the max on each one is different. So the training weights are going to be higher. So week 1 for the front squat harness is going to be 150 pounds. Week 1 for the cambered squat bar is going to be 200, and week 1 for the yoke bar is going to be 250 pounds. So the workload is going to ascend over a 9-week period of time, which is actually pretty cool if you're a program geek like I am. It's actually pretty cool because now you can think, well, what if we actually descended it? Would that work better? What if we ascended, over 9 weeks and then descended for 9 weeks and then went into, a meet peaking cycle? What would that do? Now, when you're talking with higher, intermediate, and advanced lifters, it's shit like this that helps them break those plateaus that they've been stuck at for a year or a year and a half. This is the shit that you experiment with. With a beginner, it's kind of unnecessary because that base isn't formed yet. So I'd rather have that base be formed before getting into this. Now, step out of this and step out of the powerlifting world for a minute. And let's say that you're a football player, a track athlete, or any type of other athlete that's using strength training is, in this case, it would be GPP, and the dynamic method is part of what they're doing. The more exercises you can introduce into here for them, the better it's going to be, because they're not trying to increase that overall squat, bench press, or deadlift. They're trying to increase whatever their coach feels are the movements or the variables that have the largest dynamic carryover to the field. So, and it's got variety, so even if you're training general population who's in really, really good shape, this introduces a shit ton of variety, which one of the hardest things about powerlifting and weightlifting and actually powerlifting and weightlifting are probably two of the most boring sports to train for, is the lack of variety. So it's the same shit. People don't understand that. And bodybuilding's kind of the same way. I mean, most sports are the same way. It's the same shit over and over. It's like Groundhog Day. Just every fucking Monday or every Friday. It's the same fucking thing over and over. It's more a battle of wills. Who can do it for the longest period of time and do it in the most effective manner and stay consistent is going to be the one who's ultimately going to end up on top. The genetic freaks are going to trickle in. They're going to trickle out. Stay around long enough, you're going to catch one of the big meets where they're not there. And then the person that stayed around longer is the one that's going to win. But it's that lack of variety, which, a lot of us love, but for most people, especially athletes and especially, the higher level general population, they don't really fucking like to train a lot. So the variety helps a lot, and unless they like, there is a whole other group of people who hate variety. So if they hate variety, then you got to bring it back to the simple stuff. But that's the other thing is, when you're dealing with Conjugate, you can deal with just about every different personality type when it comes to motivation. If they like certainty, they need to know exactly what's going to happen. You can lay it out so they know exactly what's going to happen. If they like variety, you can have so much variety in there. The same day is never going to be repeated twice. Now if you fuck that up and you give the person that needs certainty a lot of variety, they're probably not going to last, and vice versa. So that gets into the art of coaching, which needs to kind of be expressed as well. There's a lot of stuff about max effort work. What max effort exercises carry over best to the raw lifts? It doesn't matter. The key of the max effort exercise is to strain. The carryover to the raw lifts is going to come from the actual dynamic work, and it's going to come from building your weak points. Here's the repetition method. This is one that I missed here. The question is, it's saying that Louis is really big into 6/6s, 8/8s, 10/10s, and stuff like that. What do I think about that? Does it have its place with dynamic work? And when you're dealing with the repetition method, and this is what I didn't touch on as well as I should have, by definition, the repetition method is, training in a higher repetition range to failure. All right, so that's rarely done. That where I use it in programming, where I've seen the most success with it being used in programming, is instead of doing max effort work. So you're doing your max effort work for 3 weeks, 4 weeks, and it's just, now you're starting to get to the point where you really don't want to go to the gym. You're starting to feel run down. And on bench day, it's just not there. You're just mentally shot. So that's where one of my favorites that I used to like to do was high rep dumbbell presses. So we'd have to get 20 repetitions per set. So Louis would throw out the dumbbells, 120s, 150s, whatever it was, and say, get 3 sets of 20. I don't care how long you have to rest between sets. So it might be 6, 7, 8 minutes, and you get 16, 14, and maybe another 14. So you never really get the 20. And if you got all 3 sets of 20, then you'd use more weight next time. But it was always a stretch. And that, to me, that's the repetition method. So a few sets taken to complete failure with a long rest period, best used in exchange of the max effort exercise. Now there's the modified repetition method, which is kind of how I distinguish between the two. If I'm teaching it, is, okay, here's the repetition method. If you go look it up in Science and Practice of Strength Training, Bumpa's work, and all the other kind of stuff, this is how it's going to be explained. But that's not how you're going to do your accessories and all the other lifts. All the other lifts are going to be basically done on some type of RPE scale, where you're going to have, maybe 2 reps left in the tank. For supplemental exercises, you might have 1 or 2 left in the tank. Accessory exercises, you might have 4 to 6, left in the tank, maybe even more. For prehabilitation exercises, just the shit you have to do towards the end, you might have 20 left in the tank. So there's the difference between the repetition methods. Now, what you're talking about here is, say it's in between dynamic cycles, or you could do a whole dynamic cycle of this. It just would not be the dynamic effort method. It would be more of a repetition or a modified repetition, or whatever you want to call it, wave. That, to me, it's more conditioning based. So say it's 10 sets of 10 that you're going to run over a 3-week cycle for the bench press. So you bring the percentages down, which makes this doable, which might be 40, 50%, and keep the rest periods within control. And you're able to build a tremendous amount of volume, from that. Workload, maybe not, depends upon how much weight can actually be used. And you're going to be able to get people in shape, so a lot of things that I see, it's not really things, I'm trying to figure out how to, powerlifters 20 years ago, 15, 20, whatever years ago, it's, I get this shit all mixed up. All right, used to have 4 or 5 years, they were gym rats for 4 or 5 years before they actually found their way into a powerlifting gym. So they kind of already knew basic gym etiquette, and you weren't seeing people coming into the gym that weren't already a little jacked to begin with. They had a little bit of muscle on them. They probably were doing bodybuilding stuff for a period of time, consistently, inconsistently, off and on, and so forth. Now what you're finding is people are coming into powerlifting gyms with half that experience, if that. Some none. They have 1 year of training age, where before it may have been, 5 or 6 years of training age, and now it's 1. So you're not dealing with lifters that have the same level of conditioning from an anaerobic capacity standpoint and an aerobic capacity standpoint. So the last thing I'm ever want to do is to speak for Louis. So if you want to ask him why he does this, then I would ask him. I throw in things kind of similar to that, but I do it a little differently. I like multiple sets of dynamic work, running the sets up, it's like 20 sets of 2, 20 sets of 5, 3 or 5 or stuff like that, and reducing the rest periods it's for conditioning. You want to build muscle. So obviously that's going to help build muscle. It's going to help build that conditioning, because we're not seeing the same level of conditioning coming into the gyms as far as at that beginner level that was there many years ago. So the reason why I don't think things like this here was implemented when I was at Westside was more from the standpoint of most of the guys or girls, women that came in there had, 3 to 5 years training age before they even got there. So the conditioning was there. They had the muscle. A lot of the times there was too much muscle. So it was, how do we get rid of this excess muscle that this person doesn't need or is carrying in the wrong places? So that's the reason for that. That's what I would feel the reason is for. Do I think it's a good idea? Yes, I do. Because there's way more beginners and intermediates today than there's ever been in the history of powerlifting. I can't remember a time, going back through my whole career where half of the powerlifters that I saw in any gym weren't competitive lifters for 5 years before I ever ran into them. Now it's most of the lifters have less than 2 years, when I meet them. And that's not a bad thing. We want them to stay, that way they can maximize their potential. But there's a lot of holes in the bucket, and I think a lot of it has to deal with, educating them on, the sticking point and the stuff that sticking points, how to address sticking points, and, how to overcome them, at an earlier time, because they're faced with feeling like they can't go anywhere else. Like this is all their body can do. And it was fun while it lasted, but now I can't get stronger. And that's kind of a shitty way, to leave the sport, especially when I have such respect for what the sport can do.
You need one here, Dave?
Almost. Recently, Louis released a video showing an empty camber bar doing 100 reps. Good morning set. The 100 rep set's been going back for a long time. I think the first time Louis utilized that was with, oh man, I hope I get his last name right, Sonny Kuchar. And his triceps just wouldn't grow, so he started having him do 100 rep tricep push downs every night. And the guy put 50 or so, I don't know, 50 pounds on his bench in one training cycle. So it's like, okay, there's something to this shit. So 100 rep sets or time sets, I like time better than the 100 reps because counting to 100 is kind of monotonous. I think it's good for multiple reasons. So there's the aspect of if it's an upper back, and I posted a video of what we call the thoracic good morning or an upper back good morning or yoke bar good morning, and I like to have people do that for a song. So it's a quarter per side or whatever it is, and they just go, and they get tired, they hold it in a static position, which is still an isometric contraction, or it's yielding, just holding, and what that's going to do is to build that strength endurance, especially for the upper back, which you want to be able to keep that upper back tight, throughout a bench press, throughout a squat, throughout a deadlift. So it's one of the ways I addressed when I know we had a time period where everybody's upper back got weak as shit, and it needed to be addressed fast. So this way it was addressed fast. So it's a way to bring up a weak body part, really fast in a manner that's not going to beat the living shit out of them. So, 100 reps is a lot of blood that's going into that area. So if it's a good morning, I didn't see the video, so I'd have to see how the good morning's being done. If it's a good morning, it could have been the hamstrings, it could have been glutes, it could have been the lower back. It's how they're focusing on the good morning, which is another thing that I think kind of gets lost a little bit when you're talking about max effort exercises as well, is just changing the emphasis and where you position certain joints during your main lift changes a lot. So for instance, on a good morning, you can shift back onto your heels a little bit harder than what you normally would, and it's going to work the shit out of your hamstrings. So in other words, you try to keep the bar, about mid-foot, or maybe a little bit further back. If you let the bar come closer to toe level, it's going to be more spinal erectors. So just that simple shift changes a lot of shit on a movement. Same thing with the deadlift in regards to, knee position. If you're really, really pushing your knees out, or if you're just keeping the knees neutral, it's going to change, where your hip position is going to be and how it's going to work the adductors and how it's going to work the lower back. Same with the squat, so forth. So these are things at a different level to kind of look at. So the 100 rep sets are usually done to address a weak point. They're also done to address injuries. I addressed a lot of the injuries that I had, soft tissue injuries, tendonish injuries with very, very high rep sets done with very little effort. Reverse band bench press was one, to where the weight would be zeroed out off of my chest, in 100 rep sets to where my triceps never got pumped, which is harder to do than you think it is, because you got to let the band pull you through that motion. But it takes a lot of repetitions to get any type of real work done into the tendon area and to get enough blood into where you need to try to rehabilitate the injury that you had. Now, I'm not a physical therapist, so I'm not a doctor. I'm just telling you what I did, and why it could be there. Again, if it's, I'm guessing when I'm answering questions based upon somebody else's video and somebody else's training. So the best way to get the real answer to that is to actually ask the person themselves. Okay, the extra workouts while I'm looking through here. Most people that are going to be new to the conjugate method are not going to need to do extra workouts. They just need to rest. So I spoke about restoration and recovery and a little bit about the extra workouts in the main podcast. So I don't want to go back and go through that whole thing again. But the rest is important. So Louis kind of drove that home to me more than anybody else throughout my whole powerlifting career. And he was on the second half, the back half of my powerlifting career. My first half, I just thought the more work you did, the stronger you were. So I'm training all the time, twice a day, crazy stuff like that. Louis was the one that I remember the statement clearly. It was, you need to learn how to get bored. You need to be comfortable, being fucking bored. And it's like, okay, well, problem was I worked on my feet a lot, so there was issues with that. So when I had time to rest, I just fucking rested, which was passive restoration, not active. So I always prioritized passive restoration, which the first on that list is sleep. The second on that list was the club I used to train at had a massage room. So if that massage room wasn't occupied and I had a cancellation, I just went back there and lay down. It set an alarm clock and if I fell asleep, I woke up. Normally I didn't, but it's just to just get off my feet. And then that's just, to me, that's probably not stressed enough. Just the chilling out, which is, I probably don't stress it enough because I was also in a process of always trying to gain weight. So if I could sit instead of walk, I was going to sit. If I could lay down instead of sit, I was going to lay down. So I was doing everything in my power to burn the fewest amount of calories that I could to be able to stay into a calorie surplus to help me gain weight. Where the other impact of that is it also puts you in rest mode a lot, so it does allow you to be able to recover. Now that the active recovery was implemented more so if Mondays were hard on me. So max effort lower body was hard, really hard for me to recover from. So Tuesday always involved some kind of active recovery. If it was banded good morning, sled drags, it always, it involved that. And so it had passive and active. So I would start with the active recovery, then I would finish with hot cold contrast and all that other kind of stuff. And as I said in the previous podcast, is you will begin to adapt to your recovery modality. So you need to change that frequently. And then the ones that you find that work really, really well, pull them out of the mix completely until 8 weeks out from the meet when you really need it, then put it back in. And that's, to me, that's kind of the key to training to a meet, was to find as many things in the out of the off season. I don't want to say off season because we really didn't have one, but to find as many things outside of that 8-9 week window or whatever it was that you'd start trying to really peak for a meet that you would call gold. Like, this is a gold max effort exercise. This is a gold supplemental exercise. This is a gold dynamic effort wave, or this is a gold accessory. This is a fucking gold restoration. This is everything. Whatever that gold shit was, I pulled. It's like, fuck it, pull it, write it down. This comes back in, 8 weeks out. And then that way it got to a point where I knew as long as I could make it to the 8 week mark, I was cool. I was getting to the meet because I had everything that I needed, to put into the program at that point already laid out, which was, my goal. To use that outside of that time period was being a fool, because who cares how strong you are 12 weeks out from a meet or 10 weeks out for a meet. So as I used to joke around and call it fool's gold, why do I need it then? Why do I need it to impress my fucking training partner? If he's going to beat me, he's going to beat me. I guess if, social media is kind of making people use their fool's gold, way too frequently, instead of using it when it's really necessary, or they're not even trying to seek and find it. So I don't know. All right. Now I think I covered everything I missed except for anything that you guys have.
Yeah, we thought we could just kind of rip through a bunch of the live chat questions here. If you answered them already, just say pass, or that you answered them. And if you want to do a rapid fire kind of quick version of them, that's fine too. The first one here is, I'm trying to put on more muscle mass, and I usually respond better to bodybuilding type cycles. Is the conjugate method a good solution for guys that have only been lifting consistently for 1.5 years?
If you're trying to bodybuild, then bodybuild. So it's this question is, I kind of need, every question is it depends, or it has to have a certain degree of context and all that other stuff. But there's a lot of things that are just known. You know what I'm saying? And with this, my unknown here is I don't know what your overall training objective is. So I'm going to answer it from two ways. If you're training to be a power lifter and you want to add more muscle mass, then just increase the back end of your accessory work, and it may be done at the expense of what you're getting or doing at the front end for your powerlifting work. But it's a balance. It's a balance that you got to be able to play. And then just roll that way, or take your, depending upon, if it's conjugate type work, make everything after the max effort, the dynamic work, more bodybuilding structured, and run that way. And the other option with the conjugate is extract the lats and put those on, Tuesdays and Saturdays. So you can put those on 2 other days. So it's lats and biceps. Now, if you want to be a bodybuilder and powerlifting is not the overreaching goal here, then you really don't need dynamic work. And the max effort work is kind of debatable. I would just bodybuild, man. If you're trying to put muscle mass on and that's what your main goal is, that in itself requires a lot of work in regards to, being in a calorie surplus, hitting compound movements, hitting them in the rep ranges that you're going to be able to recover from. And so from that standpoint, this is why I don't necessarily like, if it's just a bodybuilder and they're trying to put on mass, why I don't like max effort work and dynamic effort work is because there are 2 different types of stimulus to recover from that aren't going to give you the biggest bang for the buck when it comes to muscle hypertrophy, if your goal is just to build muscle mass, right? So you can be big. You can be big as fuck. You can be, but weak. Okay. And that's why I say the context matters here. So I hope that kind of answered the question.
Okay. Does the 21-day out rule for squat and the 10-day out rule for bench apply to smaller lifters like 120 pounds?
21 would be a deadlift, not a squat. A squat would be more 14, more 7. I think it depends more on the experience of the lifter. So if I have a lifter that's a true beginner, I can really simply have them do a mock meet 7 days out and work up to their second attempts. And they're going to be recovered fine because they don't have the muscular coordination. They don't have the neural efficiency to be able to display what their true strength really is. So you got to kind of play that by ear, or not by ear, by how things feel and by how things are going. The more advanced you are, the further out those last heavy lifts need to be. So I would use that as the guiding rule and kind of go from there. The stronger the person is, as far as overall load, that's on their joints, is going to also make a difference. So, and that's not, from what I've seen, it's not an expression of if they hit a PR and it's a 181 pound world record, of 800 pounds or whatever the hell the world record is at the time. The heavier guy, I mean, the people who are holding 1,000 pounds plus on their back need longer because that's more spinal damage, it's more spinal compression than, so it's the amount of weight matters too. So that's that.
Okay. Can you discuss band assisted lifts rotating in on max effort days and benefits compared to band or chain resistance on dynamic effort days?
Well, first you're asking me to compare max effort work to dynamic effort work. So I can't do that because you're talking about 2 entirely different means and methods of training. So I can't do that. Now I can talk about the difference between the lighten method and against bands and chains. I can talk about that, and kind of explain in general terms what's going on with that. But that's a real weird question, the way that it's kind of phrased. So if you're using, let's go bands and chains first. So if you're squatting against bands, there's a few things that are happening here. The bands are applying tension to the bar, obviously. So downward force to the bar. So as you squat down, it's going to, in a way, be accelerated eccentric. So it's going to try to move the bar faster than the bar would move. if the bands were not on it. Put an empty bar in a power rack, put some bands on it, pick the bar up and drop it. You're going to see it's going to fall a lot faster than if the bands were not on it. You're going to see it's going to fall a lot faster than if you had chains on it. So it's going to have accelerated eccentrics, which is going to induce more muscle breakdown. It's going to also induce better stretch reflex. It's going to induce more pop out of the bottom. more weight going down, more weight coming up. So it's kind of the pros of that is it's great for explosive strength, and it's not a new concept. You know, it goes back to, you know, inner tubes and shit people and elastic bands and, you know, shit people were using long before, you know, Louis brought it in and took it to a whole nother level. The disadvantage of it can also ground you. So, you know, a lifter can get in the right position if it's a monolift or even a walked out in a squat, and then the bands, in a very rudimentary way, end up becoming 2 more feet on the ground. So now you have 4 feet instead of 2. Where they are trying to throw you all over the place, when the weight's light, when the weight gets heavier, it almost can feel like it's on rails. So that's the one thing to where the varying of different band tensions makes a tremendous difference. So it's not always jacking the band tension up over a period of time. It's varying, you know, moderate tensions with very high tensions to potentially light tensions from that standpoint. Now, the chains work differently than the bands because you can, if you want to visualize it, if you're squatting down with the bands, the bands are being deloaded into you. Okay, it's into your body, and as you stand up, you know, coming into you. The chains are deloaded into the floor. So it's actually better to think about this the other way. Think about it chains first. So you're doing a box squat with chains. You stand up, you got 300 pounds of extra chain weight at the top, and then at the bottom it's going to take the 300 pounds off. So 300 pounds at the top, 0 at the bottom. As you sit down, those chains all deload into the floor. Now with the bands, you're going to have 300 pounds of band tension at the top. When you sit down at the bottom, you don't want it set up to deload to 0. It might set up to deload down to like 40 pounds, but all that band tension kind of deloaded into you, not so much the floor. That's a very simple way to explain what's going on with the bands and the chains from that standpoint of the eccentric concentric action. Now, when you're looking at reverse bands or the Lighten method, that's again providing a deload at the bottom, which for me with 2 prosthetic hips is phenomenal, because where the limb is at its greatest risk, I can have it deloaded to where at the top it's going to be, the bands essentially will come off, or there will be less band helping at the top because the weight comes back on, the band tension gets less at the top, which for me, the being able to maintain the bone density I've developed, the stability and everything that comes with that is enhanced from that standpoint. That's from a mashed up meathead perspective. You know, the reverse bands and chains are, from my opinion, always superior if you're a mashed up meathead. Pushing against bands is a nightmare, you know, for my joints at least, and for most older people that I know that have been through the mill. It's a nightmare. It's a hard one. It's one you can't throw in very often, and if you throw it in, you got to have the recovery built in. The reverse bands are good to get used to the heavier weight. So it's used a lot of times with the squat. After somebody's top set, they'll put the reverse bands on, throw another 50, 100 pounds. They'll be able to pick, and when they do the pick, the bands will barely be on the bar, or it's just deloading a little bit, but then it might take off 150, 200 pounds at the bottom. So now it's allowing them to be able to get used to if it's a monolift, picking a heavier weight or picking the weight they plan on squatting in the meet without actually having to actually squat the whole thing, or to be able to walk out weight that might be a little bit heavier than what they're used to instead of just doing a straight walkout. So that's it.
Why aren't you explaining this to Timmy the trainer? Somebody said.
He retired a long time ago.
Okay. In terms of variations that are just a little off, I'm assuming sumo versus conventional deadlift is a bit more than a little variation.
It depends upon what body position. It depends upon what joint you're talking about. You know, yes, from a hip standpoint, but from a back standpoint, it can be pretty similar. So it depends what you're doing with it. You know, so I really don't know what the purpose of the question is. So yeah, there's a difference between sumo and conventional. I'm not going to sit there and say that they're, you know, the same thing. You know, some people are more suited for sumo than they are conventional, but there's benefit. There may actually be greater benefit to training the lift that you don't compete in more than the lift that you do compete in, because it's going to be able to, you know, bring up the weak points. You know, the adductors play a huge role, you know, in the deadlift, and the glutes play a role that I see a lot of people not using. If you're, you know, sent the number of videos that I get sent to review, it's insane how many people don't know how to push their ass through at the top of a conventional deadlift. It's even the sumo, it's just fucking ridiculous. Everybody wants to arch the lift up instead of pushing the hips through. So I don't know really how to answer.
Okay. Yeah, just do them to the best of your ability here. Hey, Dave, how would you program Conjugate for a deadlift-only meet? I pull about 600 semi-sumo.
The only thing I'm not changing, I wouldn't change a whole lot with the squat, you know, the max effort, lower body, upper body days. I might change the squat to be a little bit lighter and use more bars that are going to, you know, kind of work the back like the deadlift, like more safety squat bar work, you know, stuff like that. Even more safety squat bar work on the, I'd have to see how you pull. You know, I need to see where it's breaking down. But probably less straight bar work on dynamic stuff. And then the max effort stuff would be definitely more deadlift oriented and more frequent. I assume you're doing a deadlift only meet because you're probably built to deadlift, which means that your ability to be able to do more deadlift work is going to be higher than somebody's ability that's not built to deadlift. So you could be doing max effort deadlift work every other session pretty easily. It's, you know, the question becomes, what do you want to do with your upper body day? You know, because is the bench now, is it really necessary? Because it's not going to really help for shit, where you can take that day and, you know, take a lot of the accessory back work and put it on that day and potentially take it down to just 3 days per week with, you know, the max effort. And so max effort, lower body, dynamic lower body, then accessory lower body, where you just pound the shit, you know, out of the lats and so forth. And then, you know, if there is a fourth day, just technical, you know, keeping the weights at 60%, maybe lighter, but just making sure every rep is perfect. And just so it's not dynamic, it's going to be technical. You know, so you need enough weight to be able to pull yourself down into position to get a good start position, but not enough weight that it's going to become problematic to be able to recover from. And just use that as practice. And that's how I would call it. I would just call it practice. And just to lock that shit in 100%, because just a little bit off on the start of the deadlift becomes a lot off by the time you hit your knees. So if you can get that dialed in perfectly, you know, then you're going to hit a PR just because of technical reasons.
Okay. For someone who is volume limited due to SI joint dysfunction and scoliosis, my back locks up with volume, pulls, and fails below the knee, how would you attack the deadlift for both main and accessory work there?
Don't do a lot of volume. It's pretty fucking easy. You know, a lot of these training questions, guys, are, you know, the answers. Okay, I can't do a lot of volume anymore either because of my joints just overall. So I may have some max effort spider bar or whatever the hell I'm doing days where my total repetitions on that exercise for that day, I've had a couple where the total number of repetitions over that whole exercise was 6. That's it. You know, now what I did before that, you know, warming up and stuff like that, isn't high repetition either. You know, it's Theragun, it's, you know, RPR, it's, you know, anything that I can do that's going to warm the joint up and get my body to be able to move the way that I need to move with the least amount of repetitions on the joint, the better the less wear and tear. All right. So there's a balance there between, you have to do enough to be able to keep joint function, but you don't want to do too much to where it's going to create even worse joint dysfunction. So when the older you get and the more wear and tear you get, the question that used to be, is this exercise necessary to be in the program, now gets a little deeper to where it becomes, are these repetitions necessary to be in the program? You know, if you're used to doing warm-up sets of 5, what's the 5th rep doing that the 4th rep didn't already do? Is it necessary? You know, and while maintaining intelligence, you know, you don't want to go from, you know, 135 to 500 pounds, you know, so you just got to be a little smart about it and stay within your range, and only you're going to be able to find your range. Here's something that I learned over the last 15 years of being fucked up. Nobody's an expert when it comes to physical therapists, orthopedics, anybody. Not fucking anybody is a fucking expert. Most of them don't even have a fucking clue what they're talking about. And I hate to say this, but they contradict each other far worse than any strength coach or any personal trainer I've ever seen in my entire fucking life. I mean, it's insane how different the philosophies are. You try so hard to find the commonalities that don't even fucking exist. You know, so it becomes frustrating when you're the person on the other end and you know what your restrictions are and you're just trying to figure out what you can do. I mean, you kind of know what you can't, right? That's easy. You know what you can't do because you can't do it. You know, that's the easy part. What you're trying to figure out is what you can't, the limits within what you can do. Like, this is high risk, this is not. So trying to figure that out, you're going to have to take that on your own. And you're going to have to figure it out based upon how you recover, how you feel after training. And sometimes it may not express itself with joint pain. Sometimes it may express itself as you're sleeping 12 hours the next night or 10 hours the next night. The joint feels okay, but you're just trashed. So you got to really pay more attention to how you're recovering and kind of go by that.
Dave, how many Monster Energy drinks do you drink a day? That
2.
was an actual question.
2 and 3 at the very most. And that is only the ultras, purples. So the caffeine's nowhere.
How many did Justin Harris drink out here that one time?
A lot. He had like the hydros too. He had like 3 hydros and like 2 monster. He had a lot.
I don't think the hydros are actually stronger than the regular ones.
There's a little more caffeine. It's not what we thought it was, but there's a little more. I think these ultras,
I think they're bigger drinks though. They're 24 ounces.
That's why it's more. I think the ultras are like 130 milligrams or
something like
of
that.
caffeine. So it's like a cup of coffee. So, and I don't drink coffee. I don't have soda, stuff like that. So that's it. It just seems like it's a hell of a lot more because I always have them when I'm doing these things.
Yeah. Do you feel ATG pause squats give benefit and carry over as a max effort variation?
No. Unless you're built for it, right? I mean, it's anybody that's going to go ass to grass and then pause in the bottom. You know, that's a lot of risk and a lot of potential for something to fuck up. Not being in that position, right? I mean, we're kind of born to shit in that position. So the being in that position isn't really where the concern is. So it's not me sitting here saying, oh, squatting deep like that's going to get you all fucked up. That's not necessarily the case. It's what's going to happen when the person comes out. All right. Very few people that I see do that. When they come out, they're usually coming out ass first and falling forward, or they're coming out knees in, falling forward. So if they can come out in a fluid manner, you know, kind of in the same manner that they went down, then that's fine. You know, it's, you know, for max effort work, for the squat, it's, you know, it's here nor there. You know, you're going to strain. The weight's obviously going to be lighter, so it can have some advantages because of that. With the weight being lighter, there's going to be, you know, less wear and tear, less work sets getting up to that point. The negative is if the weight being lighter, it may be way under what your normal squat is. So from a max effort standpoint, you know, there's that as well. So I'm not a big fan of it, let's put it that way. But I am a fan of close stance box squats, which is almost contradicting myself because it's getting damn close to the same spot, but it's a little bit 3-4 inch. I mean, it's not ass to grass to where hamstrings are hitting calves, but it's low. So it's inches below parallel. So it's definitely low. And typically I like to see that done with a safety squat bar because it does pitch them forward coming out of the bottom, which puts them in actually a better position to come up with without having the hips shoot out because of where the bar is. For them to come up, they have to come up with their chest or their traps first, which makes sure that they're rising correctly.
Okay. What if the person's squat form just isn't any good, especially under heavier loads? Do variations mess with the form?
So you're making the assumption that the squat form is good with non-heavy loads?
That's what they're saying, yeah.
Okay, so I would like to see that. So I would like to see what the person looks like squatting 60, 70% submaximal loads to see that their squat form is really good. And then just by going up 15%, all of a sudden their squat form goes to shit. You know, that I'm not saying it's not possible. What I'm saying is more likely is the squat form at the 70% isn't as fucking good as what it's being made out to be. So yes, the heavier you go, the more your form is going to be compromised. That's powerlifting. That's the whole fun part about powerlifting, is to figure out how is it going to be compromised and what can you strengthen to make it so it doesn't become compromised. And can you get it strengthened to a point that it actually never becomes compromised but just stalls out? So that's my first answer. The second answer is, in training, anything's possible. So it could be that, yes, this is true, and that the person's form is dead on with everything from, you know, up to 70, 75%, then goes to hell. Then I would look at the second place I would look is mental. Like, what the fuck are they scared of? You know, is this a situation where they think every time they're in the 80% range, their form goes to hell? And they've ingrained this in their head so many times that you have to find a way to get it out of their head, you know, because they're mind fucking themselves. That's where I would look second. The last place I would look would be the physical component. And then that's where, yes, one of the answers could be more sets with a heavier weight, you know, kind of creeping up on it right to before it happens. Say it begins to happen at 80%. So doing more sets at the 70, 75, maybe 77% range for singles, and really work more sets, more singles. So instead of, say, a triple or 2 triples, you do 6 singles at that to get used to lifting the heavier weight with the good form. From a conjugate standpoint, one thing I think I addressed in the first video, but just to circle back, is if you're doing your dynamic work and it feels really good one day, start throwing more weight on, you know, and work up to a heavy double, heavy single if need be. Just don't miss, you know, and that's one way to see if your technique and the force is transferring to the heavier weights.
Okay. You may have already covered this, but how often would you do those 100 rep sets?
Right now, what's going through my head is with the group that I write the training for out here, that we change daily. So I write it and then it gets changed every week. I would say there's been one thing in there per week, every week for the last 18 months, where right now I think it's lying tricep extensions, where before that it was push downs, before that it was the thoracic good mornings, before that it was probably face pulls. So I kind of rotated around based upon weak points. I don't have something in there more than once a week, and that's not really on purpose. It's just me. You asked me a question, and now I'm thinking back on how often I actually put it in there, and that's what my answer is. So there's no reason for it. It's just that seems to be what it is. It's more important things to do on the other days.
Okay. What would be the best time to work muscles like the traps, forearms, calves? Would that be during the 15-minute BS window at the end of training days, or on off days where I do band work and face pulls and things like that?
During the free time, I think you're going to.
And then actually, to add to that real quick, somebody else said, should powerlifters train calves?
I think you're going to find that two answers here. I think that you're going to find you're not going to want to. You know, it's just kind of a given. And I think you're going to find that your calves grow naturally from lifting heavy fucking weight. So just supporting the weight, you know, grows the calves. Now, if somebody's dealing with knee issues, you know, bouts of shit, you know, it can be, I'm just going to say knee issues because, again, I'm not a doctor and all that other kind of stuff. Seated calf raises are fucking gold. So that's one of the things that I've had in my program all the time, but it's also one of the things that I'll forget to do a lot till my knee starts acting up. Then I'll throw them back in again, and usually with TKEs. But if I just throw that back in by itself, you know, the knee issues for me they go away. And my knee issues are not extensive. You know, I have some shit torn in there, but it's not like it needs to be replaced at this point. Watch next year, I'll get a diagnosis where they need to replace my fucking knee. But it's nothing that hasn't, I mean, cortisone's been fine, and I think in both knees, I've only had 2 cortisone shots my entire life. So my knees have typically been okay, but when they fire up, man, they fire up. And I can't squat, can't walk. But if I can get, you know, and start doing freaking seated calf raises, for me, this shit goes away in days. then by that time I can start throwing in TKEs. And then just like everybody else, when everything starts to feel normal again, I pull it out. I don't know if that's necessarily a bad thing. It may not be the best thing, but I have this paranoia that if I do something that always works like that and I keep it in all the time and it stops working, then I'm fucked, because what am I going to find that's going to work next time? So I do think the calves are important to put in, especially the seated calves. The doing them on an off day, I guess, but I would be the last person to drive into the fucking gym to train forearms and calves. I like training, but not so much to fucking drive in the gym and do forearms and calves. So if there's another reason for you to be there, so be it. If you work in a gym, you can do it then, but I would typically keep it at the end of the session unless your knee's acting up. Then I would prioritize it and maybe do a couple warm-up sets beforehand and then hit it again when the session's over.
Great. Dave, you mentioned in a video with Dr. John Rosen that the upper back for strength should look like a turtle and pop out. I'm doing all kinds of rows, but it doesn't seem to grow. What exercises would you recommend?
Keep doing your rows, but focus on pulling your shoulder blades together as hard as you can. Stop focusing on your fucking lats when you're doing rows and start focusing on trying to squeeze your shoulder blades together as hard as you can. Or if that doesn't work for you, lighten the weight and pull, your elbows back further than what you're pulling now. And then, chest supported, I guess you would call them shrugs, from that chest supported row position. Just when you have to have somebody watch you when you do this. I suppose you might be able to film it on your phone if you get the right. It's a weird angle, so it's got to have. You're gonna have to have somebody. I don't know if you can get a tripod up that high, but you want to film yourself from the back when you're doing a chest supported row. But you're gonna do a shrug, and when you do the shrug, you want to watch really close and make sure, don't have a hoodie on and just a t-shirt. Make sure that your traps are not doing the motion, or your traps are still activated. But it's what you want to see. Your traps are still doing it, but you want to see your shoulder blades squeezing together and releasing. You don't want to see what looks like a barbell shrug to where your shoulders coming up towards your ears. You want the shoulders coming back, to squeeze that together. And I think what you're going to find is most of your lat work is being done as a bodybuilder would, to be able to build, lat width instead of thickness. And once you start changing the focus of that, it will turn things around.
Thoughts on combined max effort and dynamic effort lower days? Something like the first day, max effort deads and dynamic effort squats. Second day, max effort squats and dynamic effort deads.
I don't like mixing them. So it goes back to a focus thing. I don't think it's optimal just to put that out there from a training perspective and experience perspective, and probably even a science perspective. It's not optimal because you're it's a lot of demand that you're putting on your system to recover from that doesn't necessarily have to be there. From a mental demand, what's the intent? As I spoke about a little bit earlier, you have to have focused intent when you come into the gym. So is the intent to be fucking fast and powerful, or is the intent to be strong as fuck? Because it's hard to be both. So that's why I don't like it. So there's again, it's going to depend upon what you're training for. So, I'm answering all these questions like somebody actually gives a fuck about powerlifting and wanting to become the best that they can be. If you're just powerlifting for fun, and then you can, that's fine. You're going to be okay. You can do that. You're going to be able to recover and so forth. if it's trying to take it to a level that's higher than you think that you can possibly do, then your intent is, it's everything, kind of going into the gym. So I think that the more focused that intent can be, the better the outcome.
Okay. Let me see here. How to set up 3 times a week full body conjugate if possible.
I wouldn't. I mean, unless you're. Fuck. Anything's possible, right? I mean, if it all falls down to if you're a beginner, you're gonna make progress no matter what you do. I think that's kind of overreaching. It's unnecessary. I think if you want to do full body conjugate and you want to put everything in one fucking day, then just split it into 2 days and just train 2 days and forget about the third. Just recover more. I don't know why you'd want to try to hit everything 3 times a week. If you want to hit everything 3 times a week, then go towards a training system that's designed for that. Look at Borshiko's stuff. Look at things that are built around only doing the main lifts, and that's it, and doing them at a higher frequency, and do that, because he's been doing that for 3 fucking decades with success, and he has the literature and the material out there that you can learn it and you can do it. And I believe he's available, to answer questions, and he's got seminars and stuff like that online. So it's not like you can't familiarize yourself with these methods. I know the methods. I don't know them well enough to sit here and give you a full seminar on it, nor would I try to, but I know it enough to have a conversation with somebody that's actually using it, that's trying to navigate issues with it, but I don't know it enough to be able to, say, here, do this, and here's how you do it. It's my bias falls towards conjugate. So it sounds like a lot of people, maybe conjugate's getting cool again. I don't fucking know. Conjugate's getting cool again, and they want to start doing Chico conjugate, or they want to do, starting strength conjugate. It's just fucking do. If you want to do the 5-5s, you want to do starting strength, just fucking do it, and do it the way it's laid out. If you want to do 5-3-1, do that. If you want to do something that's Chico oriented, do that. There's so many. We're in an age now where there's so many methods of training that have been vetted, really vetted, and work. And fucking people think that they know better than people that have been doing the shit for 30, 40 years, and that they know so much better that they can actually take from this person and this person and then combine it and make something that's even better. I got news for you. You're an idiot. You don't fucking know better. You don't. If you want to look at the different methodologies and look at the methodologies, I encourage that by all means. I encourage that. You should know all the methodologies. First, look for the things that are in common, and see what they are. And then, dabble around, man. Find what you like best, because what you like best, mentally, you're going to do better at competitively, so it has to fall towards what you buy into. I mean, is the bottom line. If you buy into conjugate, obviously conjugate's going to work for you. If you never buy into it, it's probably not going to fucking work. And that's going to be the same thing for everything else. But this mix and match stuff, it's kind of fucked up. It's nah, whatever. I don't want to.
Okay. How would you incorporate farmer's walks, weight, distance, speed, etc.?
God, I hate when Ted does shit like that. I'm not a big fan of like yoke carries and farmers walks and stuff like that. And a lot of that is because I'm biased. I've 2 prosthetic hips. I know what the wear and tear is of just weighing over 250 pounds and walking around. So just for a normal power lifter, so that's why I'm not a fan of that stuff, because one misstep and you got 10 weeks of training, 12 weeks of training, a year of training that goes down the drain. But with that being said, taking my bias out, I would do it on the training days, not on off days if it's going to be heavy. So, it doesn't really matter if it's going to be max effort or dynamic effort. It's going to fall towards the end of the training session. It can be, farmer walk. It can be yoke carries. It's going to be done moderately heavy. So on an RPE scale, like a 7 or an 8, you don't want to try to push the boundaries and take yourself to the point of failure and stuff like that. But it is a great way to build the hip mobility, stability. It's a great way to build torso strength. It's probably more so that than the latter. So that's where I'd put it in, is from that standpoint. It's the benefit of something like that is you can kill a lot of birds with one stone. So by doing something like that would negate the need to do, extra or even any lower back, any torso work at all. So it could be, your main lift, if it's max effort or dynamic, your supplemental lift, and then really fucking heavy carries, and then it negates the need to be able to do, now you don't have to do, any of the torso work and any of the other stuff, because it kind of, takes care of a lot of things at one time. So that's my good and bad answer to that.
Hey, Dave, you mentioned a few times that you should know the pros and cons of a given methodology. What are the absolute pros of Conjugate that should be incorporated into block/DUP, etc.?
The pros of Conjugate that should be incorporated into block. So this is kind of going back to what I was just saying. You're mixing methods, man. Why not just do Conjugate? Or why not
just do block?
Or just do block. The pros of Conjugate is they're numerous. It's the variety is one thing that I've already talked about. The greater amount of first reps is something to talk about. I guess I can wrap up all the pros without this being this long drug out answer, and just saying every sticking point is going to either be mental, physical, or technical, and Conjugate's addressing all of those at the same time.
Okay, hold on here. Thoughts on using chains during Circumax instead of band for a 1,000-pound squatter?
You're never going to get Circumax. You're not going to be able to get enough weight. So it's that. I mean, that's the fact. It's the chains are going to become a pain in the ass when you start to get over 15 chain on a squat per side. The shit, trust me, I do it. The shit's twisting, it's turning, it's doing all kinds of crazy shit. And if you go and you have 2 setups per side, well, it's still going to do the crazy shit, but now you're not going to have enough room on the bar, for the plates. So I could see more of a combination of bands with chains, to be able to, get the Circumax. Think of the name, Circumax. So it's 100%. It's kind of what you're dealing with, is you want that top weight to be over, that 1,000 pounds, which you're looking to squat. So How much over depends upon how many times you've been through a Circumax, how much experience you have, how much risk you're willing to take. And I'm not talking risk as far as injury. I'm talking risk as far as, pushing the boundaries of overreaching, and overtraining and not having to be able to bounce back and so forth. But I don't think with the weight that you're talking about, I don't think it's doable because the shit gets too funky as far as the way things unload with the bar.
Okay. How will tons of cardio affect 1 rep max on big 3?
Tons of cardio. That's a good way to define that. For me, I mean, fuck, tons of cardio for me is that 10-minute walk per day everybody's talking about that I can't fucking ever do. That's tons of cardio. Physically it can affect you, but it's again, a competitive powerlifter, not competitive powerlifter, we're falling into these, kind of gray areas again. But for most people who are not trying to push the envelope, it's not going to make any difference. Or the difference it's going to make is going to be insignificant. It's not really going to matter. If they're trying to push the boundaries of being the best powerlifter that they can possibly be, there's never going to be a logical reason for there to have tons of cardio in the program in the first place. So that's the answer to that. Is it's really it doesn't matter, and for that reason, the difference it's going to make. Let's say it's going to knock 5% or 10% off your total strength. If you're just a recreational lifter or you're just doing it for fun, it's not to be a competitive power lifter and push the boundaries and all the other kind of stuff. What's 5 or 10%? It's not a big deal, especially if you love doing tons of cardio. Then it's a fair trade. It is problematic if you're trying to be the best anaerobic, the best power lifter you can possibly be. Then you want the least amount of cardio that's going to help you maintain your aerobic base for recovery and restoration.
Okay. Would you recommend rotating in fat bar in periodically on max effort days or doing in 3-week cycle for bench deadlift? I don't know if that makes sense.
For max effort, I would change it every max effort. I would change fuck. There's so many max effort variations. If you want to, you can use the fat bar for every max effort variation. Board press, floor press, reverse band, chain, close grip, wide grip, pin presses. Or you can use the fat bar every time you want. I mean, every time if you want it, and then go to a meet, and there should be very little difference. It's Donnie Thompson trained with just a fat bar for like 5 fucking years. Never had a problem in a meet, going to a regular bar. So the fat bar feels better to me on joints than, a regular bar, but I still mix them up. So the fat bar for the deadlifts, I don't get that unless it's like grip work that you're trying to do. And then that's more of an axle, deadlift.
Yeah, that's what they said.
Which is fine. I don't know if I do it for a long period of time because it's going to reduce the amount of weight that you're going to be used on max effort work. While I'm trying to not get to the level where we're talking about different waves and phases and how you can wave and structure max effort exercises, I'm trying to keep this simple. But if you were trying to structure your max effort exercises to where it was like heavy, light, heavy, light, heavy, light, or heavy, light, light, heavy, then you would pick exercises that are going to be that. So if, say, heavy, right? So it might be for a deadlift max effort. Heavy might be pulling off pin 3, pulling off blocks. Where light might be an axle bar deficit deadlift. All right, so you're still straining and you're still doing the max effort work, working up to a heavy single, from that standpoint, the difference in weight lifted is going to be a few 100 pounds. So that's heavy light, so there are different ways that you can waive this stuff, for different results, so to say, but it's not going to matter unless you're intermediate with the conjugate system or advanced. It's beyond what you need to do at this point. So it's kind of like getting ahead of yourself. Then when you really need the kind of stuff, it's not there because you already utilized something that really isn't going to make a difference where you're at currently, but will make a big difference where you're going to be at 3 years from now. So that's a different podcast. I guess it could be advanced conjugate, whatever we want to do with that, where we can talk about that kind of stuff. But there are definitely differences in how much weight can be lifted as far as workload for max effort work. But workload on max effort work, it's still not really high because you're working up to a 1 rep max. So let's say it's 8 total sets or 5 total sets, maybe 10 total sets, and most of those are all singles. That comes down to a really, really small workload comparatively speaking to dynamic work or, example, a supplemental exercise or accessory exercise like a reverse hyper, where it may be 400 pounds for 5 sets of 10, so it's a big difference there.
Okay. Let me see. All right. Can you give some examples or some more examples of off day and GPP and recovery work?
You got the sled, which I think nothing beats a sled. So, and there's prowler work. So sled and prowler, basically, a prowler is a sled. It's just a sled that you can push. So it provides another option there. Anytime you can get outside and the weather's nice, it's going to be a good thing. If it's not outside, then you're dealing with concentric only type movements, which can be done with light bands, mini bands, face bowls, band pull aparts, banded good mornings. And yes, there is an eccentric component to these things, but it's so minimal because of you're not doing them in a sprint fashion, but you're not really fighting the eccentric on this stuff as well. So there's just the easiest way to think about this is it's a recovery day. Okay. So it's one of two things. It's either a recovery day or it's a day that you got to use to bring your aerobic capacity up to allow you to recover. So one of the two. Okay. So the aerobic capacity is simple. You just walk, or if it's inside and you got a bike or whatever it is, you don't have to do circuit training. You don't need to do any of that other shit. We're talking about kind of a very neutral to low aerobic capacity that you need to recover for the sport of powerlifting. If it's not the sport of powerlifting and it's, something other, then yes, that's definitely going to change. It's going to be higher. But sport of powerlifting, it's neutral to pretty damn low. But it's not, you'll know if you fall under because you're not going to be recovered. So it's that, then it's recovery. So if you're sore, do shit to make it not sore. So Monday, if it's max effort lower body and you feel like you got hit by a truck, okay, so that this is one outcome. You're just fucked. You feel like you got hit by a truck. Nothing's really sore, but you're just fucked. All right. You got to get out and move. You need to get blood circulating. You have to move. Okay. And a lot of this fuckedness that you're feeling is just your total system. It feels like it just got beat by a hammer. All right. So get out, move, treadmill, walk, that kind of stuff. Then passive restoration, this is where like hot, cold contrast stuff like that. All this, by the way, that I'm talking about can be done before you even have fucking breakfast. So essentially you get up, you know, slip on fucking shoes and go outside and walk. I mean, you don't even have to be awake to start walking. You just walk out the door. And then that's done. Then back in, then shower, hot, cold contrast. See how things feel then. All right. By that period of time, then you shouldn't feel like you got hit by a truck. You should start to feel like, oh shit, my middle upper back is tight as fuck. Or, you know, my traps are, you know, then if you have to do anything for recovery, you're going to focus on that, where that can be just blast straps or band pull aparts, face pulls, you know, stuff like that, which can all be done again at home very, very simply without having to go into a gym or do anything. If, now the other outcome, you know, you wake up and your hamstrings are sore as shit, like super sore, like muscle soreness and, you know, DOMS or whatever they want to call that, which if I ever got that, that was usually for me, it was always same day. It was never the next day. But if it was the next day and I woke up and that was sore, then I knew, fuck, sometime throughout this day, I'm going to have to do, you know, seated leg curls with a band. I'm going to have to put some blood in there, you know, and this is with the walking and the other stuff to get blood induced in there. Now, if I wake up and I feel fine, not great, but I feel like, yeah, I trained yesterday, but this is good. I will be cool come Wednesday. This is good. I'm not doing anything. I'm just chilling out, just resting, going to work, doing what I need to do. All right. So you gotta base this a lot on how you feel. This is optimal recovery. All right. You start basing it upon a plan, and then your body is going to adapt to that plan, and it's going to get to the problems that I was talking about before. You're going to need more and more and more and more of it, to where now your extra workout's 2 fucking hours and it just became a workout. So how are you going to recover from that? So the cool thing with the conjugate method is you have checks and balances in there. You know, one of the biggest are your max effort exercises. As long as they're going up, things are getting better. You know, so that's the ease. That's the first go-to. These are getting better. This is going up. I'm still on par. Oh shit, they're kind of stagnant. Where else can I look to see? You know, my accessories are getting stronger. Okay, so that's good. You know, my dynamic work feels good. All right, that's good. All right, so this way you can go through the checks and balances and be able to figure out what's not working. Like if all these other things are feeling good, but the max effort stuff just isn't going anywhere, then whatever I'm doing to try to build my max effort exercises is not right. So my supplemental exercise, say your max effort exercises for lower body are not going up. Everything else is moving good. Speed feels good. Accessories feel good. Everything else feels good, but your fucking max effort exercises are just not moving. Whatever supplemental stuff you're doing on those days, the max effort days, has to change. It can't stay what you've been doing. It can't stay in the same rotation. Go completely outside of the box and find something new and throw it in there, and then boom, you're going to see your max effort exercises are moving again. So you got to use a process of elimination to figure out where the problem is and then address the problem.
Okay. What kind of box height would you use for a raw lifter in a federation that requires a deep standard of depth? Would you use a high box just above parallel or below parallel?
I would use wherever it's going to be legal. You know, so if it requires you to be 3 inches below parallel and you know that, and they're consistent with that, and that doesn't change, that's where you better be. You know, because you're going to condition yourself to squat to wherever that position is, especially on the dynamic day. So that's where I go there. Now, max effort day, you can play around. You can go higher, you can go lower, and so forth. But your dynamic effort day, remember, that's a technique day as well. So whatever you're conditioning yourself needs to be whatever is going to be legal for that federation.
Okay. Hold on, I had another one. How would you do conjugate if you feel that pulling and squatting once a week is too low?
if it's a max effort day on Monday and you're doing low box squats, and then you do speed squats on Friday, that's 2 squats a week. So if you're squatting, say 50% of the time over a month period of time, you're hitting your squat 6 times. So I don't know how that's too low, because the deadlift kind of falls in that same scenario as well. So if you think that, again, if you think that you need to squat 3 times per week with weights that are submaximal, then you probably don't want to be doing conjugate. You want to do, another style of training, which is going to focus more on only the barbell lifts and higher frequency.
Okay. How often do you do heavy max effort versus light max effort, like you spoke about earlier?
I'm gonna default back to the first podcast on Conjugate, which was the podcast before this one. For beginners to intermediate, forget I even had that conversation. I never said it. You just go back, rewind, delete. I never said that. When you get in the gym, do the max effort exercise you want to do. Do the one that you're excited to do, because that's what you're going to put the most energy and effort into. So do that, okay? Forget about the other shit. The ones that are intermediate to advanced, I'll do another podcast just on advanced cycles for dynamic and max effort and how to cycle different supplemental exercises and stuff like that. And for all the intermediates to beginners, this doesn't mean that this stuff that I'm going to talk about for the high intermediates to advanced or elite powerlifters and above is going to work better for you. It doesn't mean that. It's going to work the same for them as what I've already told you for you. It's just for them, they've already exhausted all the things that you've yet to do. So they need something different to be able to get that, hence Circumax phase. So they need that to be able to get them there. They have 5 years, 10 years of conjugate that's exhausted, that's been through that. Okay, you haven't been there yet. So just because it sounds cool and it looks cool doesn't mean it's going to be the most effective and optimal thing for you to do. The coolest thing for you to do is to break fucking PRs. So that's what I'm telling you, and that's what I'm teaching you to do through this little series of conjugate training, is to break fucking PRs. That's the coolest thing, not the setup and all the other kind of stuff. And so that's going to happen by picking the exercise that you really want to fucking do and that you're most excited to do, that falls within the specs of what I said in the first podcast.
Okay. If someone is not using Circumax going into a meet, what lower body max effort variations should they use in the last 5 weeks before a meet, competing in single ply for this person?
Well, I mean, the last week out, there's really not going to be, say, the week of the meet. There's not going to be any, so the week prior to that.
I think it said the last 5 weeks.
I can't plan out 5 weeks.
Okay.
I mean, the week prior to that, you probably want to have something that's going to be more on, the way that I would define it would be something that is almost, it's 99% impossible for you to get hurt doing. That would be the week before that last week for max effort work. Just no way in hell you're going to get hurt doing it. That's what I would do there. The week before that, you're just right back into the same max effort rotation I've been talking about. Just whatever you like to do best, that's what you do.
Okay, so that's all the live ones that haven't been answered in a previous one. Did you get through all the community ones in the IG?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, here's one we could end on that was not really conjugate related, but just to end it on. He said, Dave, how is your life going besides training stuff? We all ask questions to you, but never about you.
It's fine. It's good. I almost said it's fine, man. But see, when you say that, people know something's fucked up. It's good. I appreciate you asking. things are good. You know, I got my complaints the same way everybody else has their complaints. It doesn't matter, you know, so it's good. Training's good, you know, family's great, you know, business is good. So I'm not going to complain. You know, I'm not one to complain about issues and shit like that. So I appreciate you asking, but you know, I'm here to help you guys, you know, not to, you know, brag about my victories or dwell about my failures. You know, I'll let other people do that. There's enough people online to be able to filter through, to be able to find enough of that, you know, venom or hype, if that's what you're looking for, than me. You know, I'd rather be the person that's putting you first, you know, to help you attain the goals that you're looking to do. So it's good. It's good. I don't know how to answer that.
No, you got it.
I mean,
all right.
Nobody fucking asked that, so I don't know how to answer.
Yeah, threw you off there a little bit. Sorry about that. Anyways, thanks for listening and watching, everybody. And the audio podcast will be up in the next day or so on Libsyn, Spotify, iTunes, Stitcher, all that.
We know from the literature that as long as you're close to failure, you're going to make similar muscle gains. So, but there is some evidence indicating that there may be something to varying your rep ranges, and you varying your rep ranges is not going to cost you more time, allows for more flexibility, and being fixed to one rep range doesn't, like, it's not giving you anything more, you know?